Have you ever wondered what agriculture is like in other countries? Let's talk about it. Hey, I'm Shaye Warner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Today we are visiting with Jaclyn Wilson, who is a Nebraska rancher, but is a very well-traveled one. She is going to share what she has learned about different management practices in other countries, as well as how government regulations impact these farmers and ranchers. And we're going to tie it all back together because she also talks about how traveling has impacted her own operation. Remember to check this podcast out on YouTube and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening on. With that, let's visit with Jaclyn. Grazing without limits, ranching without boundaries. Unlock the full potential of every acre with Vents, the smarter way to manage your cattle and land. Cut costs, conserve resources, control grazing across even the toughest terrain with virtual fencing that combines real-time herd data with powerful, hands-off precision. Profit, sustainability, and efficiency all in one system. Vents puts smarter grazing at your fingertips, saving you time, effort, and money compared to traditional fencing. Ready to transform your ranch? Learn more at ventsfence.com. All right, Jaclyn, well, welcome back to the podcast. It has been a while since I've had you on. I was still in college the last time I had you on, and we were talking about your internship program. So welcome back.
Holy smokes, that's been a while then.
Yeah, it has been. So we're going to talk about kind of your global travels as a beef producer and how that has shaped changed your perception of the U.S. beef industry, your own operation, and just some things you've learned today. So let's talk about your own operation first. How have your travels impacted your view of your own operation?
Probably we should start with a little bit about how the travel bug kind of came across and then how that's developed. And then we can go and talk about how the changes have happened in the operation because of it, because it's been a transition for the operation too. So growing up, my parents would always take like a week or two off during the ranching season, and we'd jump in on Ford Bronco and travel usually to the western part of the United States. So usually we did the touristy thing, once in a while we'd visit a ranch or something, but for the most part it's kind of the touristy thing. And then my first time I got to travel overseas internationally, I was about 24, 25 years old. I was part of the Nebraska LEAD program, which is a 2-year intensive long leadership program. There's similar ones across the nation. I got to go to Russia, Ukraine, and Poland for about 2 weeks time in there. And I think that was kind of the eye-opening like ta-da moment for me, and it made me really realize that we're all interconnected somehow. So from that, it just progressed because of me sharing my experiences with that. I came back to the U.S., was asked by Rotary to go to Brazil on a group study exchange. So went down there, learned not only about agriculture in Brazil for the first time. I think I was about 26, 27, but just got to see more of the country and the ag industry. And then the rest is history, as we say. So now usually I'm traveling probably about 3 to 4 weeks every year internationally, but usually doing either speaking or engaging in some kind of ag activity, whether it's with, speaking in Brussels on behalf of beef producers, or else looking at packing plants down in South America, or talking to consumers in the Pacific Rim, and just really, or even in Africa, and just really kind of getting a good grasp on everything that's going on worldwide, not only in beef but in agriculture in general, because everything is so interconnected. So from the operation, it's changed a lot because I had parents and family members, that really had not traveled a lot. And so being gone, for a week to 2 weeks at a time, and I would get the guilt trip when I got back. Well, you were gone, and then what's happened is as I've traveled more and we've seen these experiences really kind of fall back on the ranch, like they've changed a lot of our perception on things in general. I've discovered a lot of neat things overseas that we've incorporated into our operation. And not only that, but it's given us the opportunity to reciprocate. So when I travel, I have people that are hosts or kind of seeing me or hosting me on my travels or their operations, and then in turn they end up at the ranch someday. And it's really been neat to see just from the personal interaction how that has changed, but then from a business standpoint too. You cannot be gone without being organized. And so it's really changed how the ranch functions, how our communication functions, the job requirements, and the learning and educational opportunities for our team, because there's a lot of things that I do on the ranch that if I'm not here, somebody has to do them. And so it gives me the opportunity to let other people grow and develop. And I think that's something I see a lot of times in agriculture is we think we're the only ones that can do a job. And you realize you're really not. But it just comes down to teaching and educating those that are able and capable of doing that job too.
Well, there is a lot we could unpack there, but what I'm most curious about is you said, when you would travel, you would come back and there would be different changes you would make. Do you have examples of one or maybe a couple of changes that you want to talk about?
Sure, absolutely. Well, when I was saying that, I see these whiteboards here in the background. And so I was just sitting in our shop office. This was actually something I picked up in New Zealand. And we have one, two, three, four whiteboards now and a skylight calendar over on this other wall. And it's coming down to like looking up here at the boards, and we've got priorities for the week, low priorities, high priorities, ranch projects, everything along those lines. The other boards behind us in the skylight are for calendars, so we know exactly when people are gone or what events are coming up for the entire year. And because we're planning constantly, I just got back from a massive trip as part of a requirement for an international ag scholarship program. And so I know I'm here until the end of June. It's looking like I'm going to be in Africa for an event at the end of June. I know next September I've got to be gone for probably a week between Uruguay and Dubai. And so it's like getting everything organized and written out, and not only letting me know what's going on, my dad, who we're partners with, but then also our team is aware too. So like if I'm out tagging, which we're right, calving officially starts today, and I think I've had 50 some in the last 24 hours. So, and I just ran here from tagging. We'll run right back to tagging. So like if I'm not here in the shop, they can look and they can see other things that are going on too. And I'm not having to constantly try it. They're just sitting around, just waiting, for somebody to tell them what to do. They can take the initiative and go out and do it. So that's an easy one. That's just like right here visually. But I mean, there's been so many others too that have occurred along the way.
What's something when individuals from other countries come to your ranch that they pick up on or are surprised by?
The biggest thing that I hear time and time again, based off the guests that we have. So we get a lot of guests from like the UK, from Ireland, from the European Union, where cattle are shedded all winter. And so for them to come out in an area where, and there's been times they've been coming out in the snow and rain or cold, and they're just shocked that we're not having cattle indoors all winter long. But in retrospect, that was the same impression I had when I went over there and visited their operation is, oh my goodness, you guys have to keep cattle in a barn all winter long. And so, it's just differences in that. That's what their environment and management style has taught them. There's some that have continued to adjust or try to change that. So, cattle are on pasture more, but it's become something kind of comical to me when I remember my first time over to the UK and Ireland. And I'm thinking in my mind, you guys are the ones that are having issues with confinement. I raise cattle year round on open pastures, and yet 6 months out of the year, your cattle are in a barn. You're telling me that I'm a factory farm because I'm in confinement. What? So it's just clarifying some of those misconceptions that we have when we travel and we see things firsthand. If I wouldn't have saw that firsthand, I don't know if I would have picked that up along the way somewhere off of social media or our news articles. I don't know, because it's something I think, there was an interview, and I'm going to use this now, I think, moving forward, that our past senator in Nebraska, Ben Sass, did this last week on 60 Minutes. And he said, learning brings us humility. And I think that every time I travel, I learn something. Sometimes it's a shock factor, and it's like, whoa, I'm not going to do that. Other times it's like, okay, we have that same problem, or I understand now why you think like you do. And it's opened our eyes and our thought processes to be so accepting of and so open-minded in our points of view, not only in how we run our operations, but on how we think about things too. And for that, I'm extremely grateful.
That is a really good quote. What was the purpose for the confinement in the winter? Was it lack of space or pasture or the weather?
Yeah, mud. So, when you're in an environment that you're getting a lot of winter rains on really heavy, heavy clay soils, they just determined that instead of being able to run their cattle in those mucky pastures, where they can get bogged down, even stuck. I mean, truthfully, they just confine them in the winter and feed them a silage ration, usually all throughout the winter. What was really fascinating, though, this was kind of a neat deal. I was in the Netherlands here recently, and of course, Netherlands has made a lot of news in the U.S. because of the protests and the overregulation of government there. Netherlands is overregulated. It's shocking to me as somebody who comes from a really strong democracy to see what the government's trying to force on them in the Netherlands in agriculture. But what was really kind of neat, one of the neatest things that I experienced there is one of our fellow Nuffield scholars. She has a dairy farm. And of course, dairy is a big industry in the Netherlands. And there's so many people in a country that's a fifth of the size of Nebraska, and everybody's in everybody's pocket. And there's these really small farms, and so these cattle are indoors about 4 to 6 months in the wintertime, and they actually have a big agritourism event when they let them out on grass. And so we were at our farm that day that they let these cattle out on grass. There's probably about 100 and some people there that literally lined up and watched them they were both Holsteins, what they call Friesians, and then Jersey cows out on grass running and bucking. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. It's a good way to connect consumers with producers. And they've turned it into this big agritourism event. And I'm like, that's really smart because maybe it connects everybody. So maybe next time when the government regulations come down, they can say, yeah, but we've actually know producers firsthand, and this is what we see them do. And this is our experiences with them.
Now that you say that, I think I've seen reels of that before. It didn't specifically state that's what it was for. It was actually twisted for a different purpose, but that very much could have been what it actually was. Do you want to talk about what some of the regulations are in the Netherlands or maybe other countries that you've seen impact production for those producers?
The Netherlands was a really interesting one. And the reason being is, of course, the Netherlands falls under EU regulations too. And so a lot of times it's similar to like what we do in the US with our states. So instead of states, though, they have countries in the EU that are setting their own rules and regulations and regulatory things too. Most of them have to line up with the EU, but then there's some countries like the Netherlands that are even going above and beyond. The problem with the Netherlands is it's multifaceted. Over 50% of the country is under sea level. Water is a massive issue, and there's a lot of canals and dikes and infrastructure to prevent the country from literally flooding on top of itself. You know, as well as I do, as a lot of producers out there, when you have water and you have cattle, there always seems to be a nitrate topic that follows. And so a lot of the regulations in the Netherlands focus on nitrates, water runoff, the population controls on how many animals you can have on a certain acreage. And a lot of that stems from the massive population base that's there too. So what they've done is they've highly subsidized agriculture in the Netherlands. Almost every single producer in the Netherlands receives some kind of subsidy. And the subsidies that they're receiving, they're encouraging producers to go organic or to decrease their cattle numbers. And that's what they're doing. I mean, you know as well as I do, the economics in ranching and farming sometimes aren't there. So if you're encouraged with a subsidy, we're going to start decreasing our herd numbers because the government's telling us to, but they're paying us for it. So there are those that are, of course, completely against the whole system of being subsidized for decreasing their numbers. For the most part, what we see is that the overall thought is they're moving towards organic, moving away from pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, all of this, even though it's kind of a juxtaposition, because here they have manure that they're producing in, in these confined areas like their dairy barns and stuff, yet they're bringing in massive imports of fertilizers overseas to put on their fields. So you're just shaking your head like, really? So it's a lack of sometimes just plain common sense in the matter, but it is affecting a lot of agriculture producers.
Yeah, I've heard about that on other podcasts where it's talked about quite a bit. And so that's interesting. I appreciate your perspective on that. And the subsidy side, I mean, we see a lot of subsidies come out in our country too that don't help the system either.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think what they're realizing is that they do need to push back because they're getting too heavily regulated. And that's something to note here too. I mean, I see it time and time again, not so much in the ranching side, but, more on the cropping side of people that are encouraged to plant or not plant, or insurance programs that, it doesn't sometimes make economic sense.
Now, with the Netherlands, are there regulations around methane emissions too? Is that part of it?
Yeah, and they're trying to, there's some thought process there. And so I know we were at a couple different farms there that had they had some new emissions generator control things that they're trying. We don't have them here. It's not an issue here, so I don't understand them completely. But they were able to, try to tell themselves that they were in zero emissions or actually positive to the other direction. And so, yes, it's a growing concern. The problem is there's still a lot of those places that aren't measuring it accurately. And so same with like carbon credits and all that, you're on a farm. And I mean, and this isn't only in the Netherlands, this has been multi-country, and you're on a farm and they say, well, we're doing better than we have been doing. Our soil quality is increasing. Okay, well, how long have you been testing your soil? Well, for 3 or 4 years. Okay, but what was it like a decade ago? When none of this, or actually probably 20 years ago, when none of this stuff was in the news or making buzzwords, what was it like then? How do you know it wasn't better at that point than what you're doing now? So, I mean, there's still just a lot of he say, she said kind of stuff on a lot of that. And so I kind of take it all with a grain of salt. I mean, carbon credits, especially in ranching or farming and stuff, it's a great idea. It's good. It's an additional income source for a lot of people. But is it really legit? Is there really good, accurate ways to measure that?
It depends on who you talk to, what side of the fence they're on. Yeah. And I've covered it on the show once, and it could be something that's really exciting for some people, but I still question the accuracy of it sometimes. And maybe that's because my husband does a lot of soil testing on the farming side, and he kind of hums and haws about, like you said, what were those numbers 20 years ago, et cetera? How much data do we actually have?
Exactly. And I mean, can we compare it, or is it just cyclical based off of climate, and everything with it too? It's hard to tell.
Well, there's so many factors that impact those things too, outside of what we can control. So we've talked a lot about the Netherlands, kind of the EU. What about Africa? What have your experiences been like in Africa?
So the last trip, I actually just got back last weekend. So I was gone for 44 days total. This trip has been 2 years in the planning though. So I mean, thank God for that, because I don't know if I could have done it otherwise and without the great support of a good team here. But so in the 1940s in the UK, there was a gentleman by the name of Lord Nuffield. And at that time, he was like the richest man in the world. And he realized that there seemed to be an educational gap in young adults that were already established in their career because, maybe those opportunities weren't there for them to have further their education, about that 25 to 45 gap. And so what he did is he established like an endowment and a scholarship program called Nuffield. And so it started strong in the UK. Australia has a really strong program. It's about 19 countries that participate or have sent scholars to this. I was fortunately selected as one of 5 in 2024 from the US. So there's 3 facets to the program. The first is that you're required to come to a contemporary scholars conference for a week. In my case, I was in Brazil in 2024. Then you have 4 to 7 weeks of independent travel on a research topic, and some of those weeks have to be international. My research topic focused on traceability. And then one of the US requirements is that you have to participate in a 5-week global focus program. And so that was the last requirement I had to do, besides just having finished writing my report. I had to be in Japan on March 14th, and I met up with 10 other scholars from, there was 8 countries total that were there. We had scholars from, let's see, Poland, Ireland, UK, New Zealand, Canada, the US, Australia, and Taiwan. And all different all different backgrounds, both production and industry and in agriculture, everything from a fish farmer for pets to a poultry, person in Ireland to a dairy to nutritionist in Poland. So we had a big array of people. So we started in Japan. I had to be there on March 14th, and we spent a week in Japan, went to Vietnam, jumped over to Kenya for 9 days, then Netherlands, Spain, and then back. We ended in Texas, most specifically down there in West Texas. And then I finished that and flew to DC for like 3 days with NCBA and was at their legislative conference, and then came home. So right into Cali. But Kenya was one of the countries that I have not been to. I've been to South Africa, part like South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, but I've not been to Kenya. And the corruption in Kenya was mind-boggling to me. And how everybody you would talk to would note how the corruption was there and how government projects actually got done and how it influenced a lot of industries, especially agriculture, because you had to play the game. Or if you didn't play the game, you had to be really conscious about, your business methods and what happened. Because, there's, honest to God, there's times you could just end up dead. And so that was extremely fascinating because it is such a mecca for agriculture. There's so much potential in countries like Kenya. But then you think about the corruption aspect of it and you're like, well, do you really want to have a business there? And so, but overall, we were so many different ag operations there, everything from blueberries, avocados, macadamias to borons, which is a Bos indicus breed, to seeing how the wildlife conservation piece played into, speaking with bankers and even a great senator, and seeing farms and everything else throughout the countryside, and then experiencing the culture too, and seeing how honest to God, it was the most kind of out there experience ever. They could put 4 people on a motorcycle there. And that's a normal sight. 4 people on a motorcycle. And you're just like, how in the heck does you handle that? Or there was one guy that had a full-size mattress on the back of a motorcycle. And I'm like, my packing evidently or how we load trucks and trailers here, it needs work, evidently.
So I have previously had Andrew Uden on to talk about some of his travels, and he sent me some pictures of how they transport livestock. And I don't know if it was Kenya, but it was somewhere, I think it was an Africa country, and it was wild.
Yeah, if it can load, they can figure out a way to tie it down. And we had there, one of our hosts there, her and her husband was the exec of a public traded company called Kukuzi, which is a big ag industry. And so she had given us like this page for like bingo. And of course it was things like, if you see a runaway donkey cart or chickens or live chickens on the back of a motorcycle and all this stuff. And I'll be dang if we about didn't see everything she had put on the bingo card. So, but it was fascinating. But what was really cool, one of the projects that we saw over there was a project called My Tank. And it's a nonprofit, because one of the big problems in Kenya, like there is in so many countries around the world, is water. And not only the cleanliness of the water, but where their water comes from. And so what My Tank has done is installed plastic tanks in houses over there. And it's literally saved these women of this household miles upon miles of walking every day just to get water. Something that we really take for granted here, to just go turn on the sink faucet and we've got running water. But over there, it can take 4 to 8 hours in a day for them to walk to get water to just do basic things like cleaning dishes or washing clothes. And so it was really neat to see that our Nuffield group actually collaborated all our funds together and purchased a My Tank. And hopefully when I get back over there to speak in Africa in June, that I might be able to run. I'll be in Tanzania, but run next door to Kenya and see our tank being installed, because that can be so life-changing for somebody, and something that you never realize here how fortunate we really are.
There are a few things more important than the land beneath our feet and the farmers and ranchers who work it every day. At Noble Research Institute, we believe those closest to the land are its greatest guardians, and for more than 80 years, we've made it our mission to help them thrive. Noble is the nation's largest nonprofit dedicated to farm and ranch management education. Through applied research, in-person workshops, and on-demand courses, we give producers the tools and knowledge to regenerate their land, strengthen their grazing operations, and build lasting business success. From soil health to stocking rates to bottom line profitability, Noble works alongside farmers and ranchers at every step, because healthy land and profitable operations go hand in hand. Explore our courses and resources at noble.org. Noble Research Institute. Better is possible. Yeah, that's not something I think about, because for the most part, I always remember even having internet. So to not have water is crazy to think about.
You think about things like that, and you think about things like water was a constant theme across all those countries we visited. Whether in like Netherlands has too much, or Vietnam, that their rice fields are seeing such an increase in salinity because of differences in how the climate has changed, to Kenya, where they're walking for miles because places like the rose greenhouses in Kenya are using so much water, till we get into West Texas, where they share the same aquifer that we do here in Nebraska. And the aquifer, there's people down there that saying there won't be water by 2040. But yet you've got these massive dairies and data centers that have moved into West Texas. So, I mean, it's amazing how some of those topics, once you get into a country and you experience it firsthand, we see how interconnected we really are, and that we have so many of the same problems, like water, the aging population, the economics, the government regulations. I mean, the list goes on, and every country almost has those same exact topics.
So, how have your travels made you more grateful to ranch in the United States?
There's a lot to that. And I've said this time and time again. There's no place like home, and I will get homesick when I'm gone. I got really homesick this one, because, you have such a grueling schedule in so many time zones, and you're in different cultures. And not only that, but, you get no time to yourself because you're traveling as a group, and you really have not much control over, like, you're used to being your own boss, and all of a sudden you lose control of your just because there's an itinerary and a schedule you have to follow, and other people in a group you need to be considerate of. There's so many great things to get home to, and to realize you can make your own decisions. You can run your own business. You don't have to do it like everybody else. You can expand how you want, or you can come up with these crazy ideas. We're hosting right now just down the hill, and we're putting countertops in today at what's going to be a future like Airbnb project. And so it just gives us this thought of, like, we want to share our piece of heaven with more people, because we've seen places around the country or around the world that I think people could learn a lot from coming out and visiting here. It's also given me some business ideas. Started a new business in 2024, started to invest in some cattle down in Uruguay, because I was seeing genetics overseas, especially the Red Angus, that could benefit the genetics that I have currently on the ranch, and then other genetics in the U.S. And so working on a project right now to get those genetics into North America. And so, is that something that I ever would have thought of before 2024? Absolutely not, because even though you had traveled, you didn't realize that how small it really is, and how simple things can really be. And there's so many opportunities there if we just take advantage of them.
So another question that just came to mind, and if this really isn't, in your wheelhouse from your experiences, we can jump past it. But one thing we talk about when we're advocating is we'll say the United States beef industry has one of the safest food systems. What are your thoughts on that, having toured other countries?
I have said this time and time again. I love our beef industry in the US. The one thing that the US does better than any other country is efficiency. There is no other country in the world that has the supply chain similar to like what we do with that many sectors, and then a processing industry that can process 3,000 to 5,000 cattle in a day and do it in a super efficient manner. That is our strength. I feel that our standards are great. I mean, I'm very supportive of the standards we have, both by FSIS and also USDA, in our safety of product. But the concern is the perception still overseas of U.S. beef is not necessarily a positive one. And let me give you an example of this. So one of the gentlemen on our trip, he's a veterinarian in Taiwan, and Asia, there's a big part of the Pacific Rim population. So your countries like South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, that feel, and this goes back to a lot of the rhetoric that they've been told time and time again, that the U.S. beef industry is unsanitary, it's unsafe, it's disease laden, there's no traceability to know where animals come from, and they're all in confinement in factory farms and corporations, and they're being force-fed antibiotics and growth promotants. That's their perception. And so that's what we're dealing with when we're traveling. And then, I know when we came into a couple feedlots last week in West Texas, and there was things about those feedlots that are a lot different than some of the other feedlots that I've toured and had the opportunity to see, but it brought up some great conversation points. If people don't know where their food comes from, or even where those animals can track back to, or what's the health situation on those animals, and what's the day-to-day antibiotics that those animals are have for feed additives. It's unless we can communicate that to those foreigners, it's tough to get past that perception. And so I think we need to do a better job. I cannot tell you how pleased I've been with the interaction that I've had, specifically with the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and I think that they've done a stellar job trying to get that messaging across about what the beef industry really is like in the U.S., but I still think we have a lot of work to do. And in retrospect, we also need to get the chip off of our shoulder. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of producers that I hear from that say we have the best genetics in the world. And I'll be honest, I've seen some phenomenal genetics out and about. Uruguay, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, even places like Namibia. I mean, they have phenomenal genetics. Paraguay, I was in last year, and somebody explained it best to me in Paraguay. They go with the systems that they have in place, that they're able to bring the top of any of those different breed genetics from all over the world into their country. We don't have that same capability here in the U.S. There's only certain countries that we can import semen and embryos and genetics from. And I think that that's going to put us at a disadvantage in the future, because these other countries are able to do that. Not only can they bring in the best from the U.S., but they can bring in the best from other countries too. And so, yes, there is animal disease issues with that too, that we need to be cognizant of, but we also need to be open-minded to the fact that maybe there are some really, really good genetics out there that maybe we're missing out on.
That is very interesting, and thank you for bringing that up, because I really wasn't entirely sure what the perception of the U.S. beef industry was. It's something we've talked about with people within the United States or in our own states, but I didn't know that that's also the perception other countries had.
And it's disappointing. And I think the reason it is so disappointing is because, our import-export markets have done a lot of work and a lot of good. And I mean, but at the same time, when you think about countries like the EU, we look at the EU and people travel 3 hours, and they're in a different language, different culture, different ecosystem. I mean, everything's different. And here, I mean, if I go to Kansas, yeah, there's sometimes there are different culture, different languages stuff down there too. They're totally different. But I mean, we're kind of, I think in a way we've become sheltered because we're in our comfort zones. And and if we do travel, we're still all speaking the same language. And we're so relatable in a lot of the things that we do. Even though, producers all over the US are so different too, we still know we're going to have to deal with the big four packer, or we're going to have to deal with probably selling at a sell barn, and we're going to know that system. And I think that's one of the things that we've become sheltered in. And that's what I've seen in those travels overseas is it just opens your mind to really thinking about industry different, not only from the US standard, but also from other countries' standards.
Absolutely. Well, Jaclyn, I think you and I could talk for several hours, but I know you've got to tag calves and I've got to pick up a kid. So if there's one thing you want listeners to remember from our conversation today, what is that?
I think the biggest thing about that I want people to recall is when we had the tour in West Texas last week, and we had to write a report at the end of every country that we had visited. And the challenges that those in our group from other countries had talked about was the antibiotics in our feedstuffs, the lack of traceability, and then also the lack of information on subsidy programs and how insurance works. And it was kind of an eye-opener to me because I always think of those things in my mind. But when that was a group consensus that those were big challenges that they foresaw in our industry, maybe it's something we really need to think about. Even though, yeah, not all of them were Americans, only 2 of us were. But at the end of the day, we do a lot of export markets. And so I think, we need to be conscientious of what's going on outside in the world too, to really learn how maybe we can even better our industry inside the U.S.
Absolutely. Well, Jaclyn, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Shaye, and hope to see the little one soon.
All right, folks. Well, remember that if you have any comments about this podcast episode, you can send them through Spotify, comment on YouTube, or get a hold of me via my website. But the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, preferably 5 stars, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find this information valuable. And with that, happy ranching.